Welcome to another episode of the SaaSTrana podcast. Today we have with us Goutham. We have veteran technologist with 3 decades of experience building large-scale software products, working in large corporates as well as startups and companies that he has built and sold them to large corporates. Currently, Goutham is working helping other startups build their version 1 product, and he's also a licensed pilot, owning his own plane. Today in this podcast, Goutham shares some of the trends of application security and some of the threats that happens around it, some of the process framework that everybody has to apply to mitigate those threats, and he's also drawing some of his pilot experience on the importance of checklist and how that discipline can be applied to building softwares to mitigate risks. Welcome to the SaaSTrana podcast, Goutham. Pleasure to have you here.
My pleasure too. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. All right, Goutham, I know you very well. I know that you have worked in corporates and startups, and also now doing something new, exciting, and probably in stealth mode. I'm not sure if it's come out of stealth mode. Uh, been through exits in startups, but yeah, can you just walk us through and tell a little bit about yourself and what you have, something about yourself and your journey and what you're currently up to?
Yeah, I define myself first as a software engineer, and then perhaps as an entrepreneur. Even then, as an entrepreneur, I would call myself an accidental entrepreneur, someone who had to become an entrepreneur. Yeah, we all are. None of us, I don't know, many of us did not end up here by choice 100%. We have our core strengths. Different people have different core strengths. And at some point, you want to expand your strengths. Sometimes you find that you cannot do it within the constraints of being an employee. So you choose to become, something more than an employee, and that's when you become an entrepreneur. It's a very loosely defined term. Anyway, our journey, I think similar journeys for some of us. We started, 30 years ago, almost 30 years ago, as employees of some organizations, different people doing different aspects of running the organization. My role was mostly as a software engineer for several companies, and it's been 30 years. And sometime in 2008, I had this feeling that I could do more. And there was this movie, Abhishek Bachchan, was called Guru, and that movie did no favors. That kind of made you go put a gun to your head and say, "Hey, I'm going to take this leap of faith in myself and see if it will take us somewhere." And I think the line in that movie was, "If they are paying me so much to do this job, imagine how much I could make if I did this on my own." So that was a catalyst, and I think that's when I became the accidental entrepreneur. I think it was a time when 2008 was the time when the first Android phone was released here in the US, and at that time, the biggest opportunity that jumped out to me was the fact that by default, the Android phone did not have a corporate email client. And most people living in Redmond, most people out here, many employees of Microsoft, you're used to using corporate email on your phone, and having a new phone is no use if you had to carry another phone or a BlackBerry to get your email. So that's what started that process. I started building an email client for Android, specifically for the Exchange server. And that got some traction, and it helped sell more Android phones, and it also helped us sell the software. And I think around a couple of years from then, fast forward a couple of years, Android started having native email clients. But when that happens, typically when your product becomes redundant, and when when it feels like the world is crashing around you because the phone already comes with an email client, your natural instinct would be, oh my God, I'm finished. But we pivoted a little bit to the side and discovered that, sure, there's all the software for getting your email on the phone, but there's that issue of what happens if your phone falls into the wrong hands. What happens if your phone is unlocked and someone else gets a hold of the phone? What happens if someone plugs your phone to a USB port and plugs it to a computer? And those days, the operating system was not mature enough to recognize the importance of a secure container for your data, for your application. So there was no way to secure your email and sensitive information. So what we did was instead of just focusing on the usability of the application, we also started focusing on how secure it is and how can enterprises rely on this piece of software to get your email on the phone, but take enough measures to make sure that your email is not compromised if the phone is lost, or in several other scenarios. One of the interesting scenarios was, I do not know if this is true, but it has been said that an exec left the phone, unlocked the phone, and gave it to his child to play with. And the child accidentally opens an email and replies all with gobbledygook, right? Even something like that.
Possible.
Yeah. So things of that nature. So
it's happened to me as a butt dial, by the way, and it was not gobbledygook, but it was just a simple question mark or a yes, and people actually thought it was a valid response. Yeah,
exactly. So we trust the phone to be. So we trust an email coming from someone to be indeed from that person, and we do not. And you might even take action on an email based on the fact that it came from you, and it might not be the right thing to do. Now, so you opened up a different angle to it. So that's the other scenario. How do you know that the email that came from Venky is indeed from Venky and not someone else who pretends to be Venky? So these are basics of security that, and frankly, I had to brush up a whole lot of basics to come back to implement some of the measures that we had to take on that application. Anyways, 6 years from then, of course, we partnered with a bunch of mobile device management vendors and had the name of the product was Touchdown. Had it be the official email client for MDM vendors who did not necessarily want to go through the whole process of implementing an email client. So we had over 25 different vendors who used our email client as the official email client. So that was good business, and eventually it was acquired by Symantec, which wanted to integrate that into their mobility portfolio. So that was the story of becoming an entrepreneur. But once the exit happens, that's when the entrepreneur is suddenly out in the middle of the ocean with no direction and going up and down in the waves, trying to figure out what to do next. And I spent a couple of years thinking, doing fun things which had nothing to do with technology, but eventually, of course, we always gravitate back to tech and start thinking about ways in which you can keep your brain cells active. And so I work with one of the startup incubators here in Seattle, and I have the privilege of being able to pick and choose the projects for which I try to build a prototype or a first version or a V1, so to speak. And that is my dream job, right? Building a V1 is one of the most satisfying parts of building anything. Because after V1, you have customers, you have investors, you have whatnot, so many restrictions and constraints. So I've been doing that for the past few years. Yes, working on something new, but we're still in stealth, so I'm not going to talk a whole lot about it. It still, again, has to do with tech, and anything that requires a server or a client or networking or security is something that I'm always interested in. Long story.
Fantastic. Yeah, it's a very good story. I think a few points came to my mind, and I was noting down my point of view on that. You started off saying that you're an accidental entrepreneur, and
Yeah.
I said that we all are. And even people who decide that they choose to be an entrepreneur, or this is what I choose to do, and I'm going to get a little bit philosophical here because the amount of combination of forces and things that has to fall in place, even if what you set out to do actually happens, has a lot of accidental elements around it. So even though we might gloat about it, thinking that I chose to do it, I did this, there's a lot of accidental factors that has to come in place. So that's why the statement is we all are accidental entrepreneurs. It's just that some chose to do it and it actually happened. And for somebody else, they did not choose anything and it just fell in place. And then they
It's
went with the course of time. It's just a thought
exactly.
process, right?
You are
But
right.
we all
Yeah.
are accidental entrepreneurs. That's my philosophical view on it. But you touched on a very few common themes that applies to everybody, right? In anything you do in life, whether it's entrepreneurship or as an employee, having some sort of a self-awareness in terms of what are your core strengths, and also more importantly, what is it I like doing, right? Core strengths not at this point of time, but what are the core strengths I can aspire to build and I can set my time to build it. And you had a lot of clarity around that. And that clarity is very important to also have the accidental elements fall in place and actually get value out of it, which is what happened to you, which I found very interesting. And like any other startups, the idea is just a tingle to get you started, right? But you always are going to have pivots. You're always going to have different market forces that are going to come in play, which is going to change your assumption that got you started and you had a pivot. So
Correct.
finally, entrepreneurship is not about a $1 billion idea or $1 million, whatever size it is, right? It's an ability to stay determined and pivot
Correct.
and stay the course and be motivated, right? So which was pretty interesting, which happened to you with you. And again, accidental factors, the company that acquired you and the team that you worked with
Right.
ended up also joining me. So I think it's a
Perfect.
small world, right? One of the
Right.
CTOs of my company, ex-CTOs of my company,
Yeah.
uh, was part of the product that he was managing after the acquisition, right? And I think
Yes.
you worked with him,
Yes. Yes.
Ashish Pradhan. Yeah.
Fantastic guy, by the way. Fantastic guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I still give a lot of credit to what we are, to what he had
Yeah.
done. So yeah, it's so many factors around out of our control, and then they come together and we have a story to tell.
Yeah.
Great story, Gautam. Really very good story. And of course, your epiphany moment of what next after the sale and sitting on a pile of cash. You did not raise external funds, right? It was basically almost a solopreneur kind of thing or a small team.
Yeah,
Uh,
so and that is the unique part of that story. Different stories, different things work for different people. But in my situation, there was nothing. So the company, I mean, in most situations, of course, the company started with basically zero, and the process to build value was entirely through the software. No marketing, nothing, no additional budget. So obviously there was no venture capital involved at all. And it might not work in all situations, especially these days when there's so many different products vying for your attention. It might not be. I can't just put so the whole build it and they will come might not always work.
Yeah.
And I think of success as not just. And again, there are at least two different types when you think of yourself as having had success in a certain effort. There are two types of successes, and I like them. I like one more than the other. The one is technical success. That means what you set out to build does work the way you insisted that it is going to work. So you're technically successful. Your product does work. Well, nobody uses it, but it gets the job done. And that is technical success, and it's just as important as business success. In which case, your product works well. Maybe it doesn't even work well, but business-wise, a lot of people use it. So that is, success from a business perspective. And that's where you actually say that, yeah, the company is successful in its job of creating revenue. So there are, if you look at if you open my computer, you'll find 10 or 15 or 20 different projects in various stages of completion, and some of them which have been abandoned, some of them which are still there. And that's the case with many people's GitHub accounts as well, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
Your GitHub account is a crematorium, or it would say it's a field of dead projects. Some of them have little daisies coming out of them. Some of them are just dead and gone and forgotten and no use. But some of them have little daisies coming out of them. And what I tend to do is look back on those projects once in a while to think about which ones have these daisies coming out of them, run to some of them and pick them up so that you can use them in your next or in your future endeavors. So anything that you do that even if you think that it's failed, it has taught you something. It has had some benefits, which you never know when you'll come to use in the future.
Fantastic. All nice golden nuggets of wisdom coming out of this. Yeah, I like the thought process of building version 1. In fact, that is my core strength as well. But I think of it as a conflicting force for somebody like you, because my version 1 strength is actually being a barrier on the technical capabilities that somebody aspires to build, and look at what is the absolute bare minimal we need to start selling, and then iterate from that, right? So it's in a way I end up becoming a biggest barrier for a pure technologist in the version 1 ecosystem. So you and me will have a lot of friction if we end up working together on version 1.
Well, frankly, that's because your success is business success and the techie success is technical. So you're trying to you're trying to mold that technical success into a business success by ensuring that, you're not building a square peg for a round hole, and that's natural.
But where we converge and unify is the pivot that you mentioned. I really love it because that is very close to what I do for a living right now. You pivoted in the sort of market crisis, to making security as a core value add of the client, which is very interesting. And that's also a transformation that is happening, because even if you're not building a security product, you are building an app for solving some other problem. The fact that you mentioned that security became a differentiator for you to provide the value. So have you seen the application security ecosystem change and evolve over a period of time? Have you seen your own responsibility in the way you look at it evolve over a period of time? Anything you want to share on that front?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot, right? If you really think about, the times when we started out, and I think many of the current junior engineers have not even been born at that time. This kind of dates ourselves, but
you don't have to keep re-emphasizing that, Goutham, to make us feel old. I was trying to hide my 30 years experience, but you have just put it out on the public now. But anyway, I'll live with it. Okay.
So there was a time when your brush with security was user ID, password just to get into a computer. There was a time when security was all about ensuring that the password you type does not appear on the screen. That was security. And then came the time when, oh my God, I've started installing software from random floppy disks onto my computer. I hope I don't have a virus. And suddenly, what's that? Welcome to the dungeon. That was when we started seeing things happen with bad effects, right? And that was, again, about 25 years ago. And I think at that time, a security company typically would be building something that prevents viruses from taking over your computer. And that was fine. That went on for a few years. And suddenly you started plugging in your computer to the network. And suddenly you started realizing, oh God, now you have viruses. Now you have things that can steal your data. And then again, the web, the HTTP/S protocols, and every time you take one step towards improving technology and improving lives, you're taking one step back in terms of protecting your users. And so any new thing that you figure out, so be it social media or any of the new technologies, AI, you are opening up the world. The user, you're making them vulnerable to new threats and new types and creative ways of stealing data or money or both from your end users. So the only thing that stands between you and total disaster is whatever measures you take, be it different levels of measures that you take at every step of the way, from right from the network level to the application, to protect your users. So things have been changing, and they will keep changing. So if this has happened in the last 25 years, imagine what the next 25 years will look like. I mean, there's no limit to it.
But the silver lining that I see in this change, even though you mentioned that we are catching up and we are a step behind as we adopt new technologies, the silver lining that I see is, at least in terms of a thought process and a mind share or anything that people build, they still give it an integral importance as much as they give to the features, right? So, which is a good change.
I hope so. I hope so, because and remember, building the V1, and that's the key. So when you build your V1, you might build it with a bunch of assumptions, and if you do not think about how someone can compromise your V1, if you don't think about it at that time, you will have a lot of rework to do when you get to V3. And when you achieve business success, and that whole thing comes crashing down by just one little oversight. So yes, thinking about how someone can compromise your infrastructure, compromise your carefully crafted application before you consider V1 code complete is definitely important. And again, it doesn't happen by magic. It happens by a couple of things. One, it's either hard-earned experience by someone who has tried and failed, or it is actual integrating that thought process into the curricula of new students who are new generation of engineers who are coming into the workforce. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think you touched a little bit about it in your own example of the little daisies you pick up from your past GitHub project. Now, the problem is and now you're just talking about your GitHub repositories from which you go back and look. But now that repository is exploded into many, many more different sets of people who are accessible, who started something. And somebody somewhere might find something important and just pick it up and start using it and start using it. And now you understand where I'm getting at, right? Co-pilots and all those other things are coming up as well.
Yeah.
And how much of a thought process and thinking and security has been put on that piece of daisy that you're picking up and integrating because you liked what you saw is now going to become an amplified threat. So any thoughts on what can be done on this area to have the checks and balance in place?
So I'll go back into my favorite mode of drawing analogies. You picked up daisies from your cemetery, but you might look across the fence to someone else's cemetery and pick up what you think are daisies. You might be picking up dandelions, which look pretty, but it's still a weed, because deep under that are some dangerous things. So how do you trust someone else's daisies, because you are not the one who built it? So there are pros and cons of co-pilots, and my understanding so far, and I must admit I have never used it, because I'm a little masochistic when it comes to technical work. I try my very best to do things which are hard, things that are hard to understand, things that are not trivial. I'd rather build them myself than trust someone else's judgment on how it should be done. And it could be a personality thing, but there are people who are comfortable with picking up code from other sources. But the key there is, make sure you smell the code before you deploy it, because it might not be a daisy. Make sure you understand how it works deep under the cover. So try not to pick the lazy path of picking someone else's code and using it, even if it is legit and legal and everything.
Yeah. So yeah, wonderful. So it just comes back to habits. Is there something technology can do that allowing the speed of the temptation of picking up some other ready-made piece of code that you expect what happens, but can I build a layer of defense on top of it? Is a challenge. I mean, that's a challenge I spend a lot of my shower cycles thinking about. Assuming that these things are going to exist, and we cannot completely solve it, but how do I mitigate it? Can I have right now we have a web application firewall that acts as a gateway, but as LLM models picks up, can I incorporate LLM models in terms of the security defense that we provide? It's a conceptual thought process, easier said than done. There's a lot of details around it, uh, but yeah, I mean, do you have any views on this, or as a purist, you say, you know what, the coder has to take the responsibility?
At the end of the day, well, I shouldn't say that. Where the rubber meets the road is what is in that code base when you press deploy or when you press build. Okay, so whatever is in there, if you're not 100% sure that it can be safely deployed, don't do it. And sometimes problems will lay beneath the covers unseen for years and years before they manifest into some bad things that happen. So that's the reason why you got to be 100% careful. It will look like it works today, but it might bomb in a few weeks or a few months. So there's dangers there. But when it comes to using these models to put checks on models, what you're essentially saying is creating Uber AIs to control AI, what one AI has generated. I am pretty sure this will be an interesting track moving forward for the next few years or so.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, because people are building very critical business logic using prompt-based inputs.
Right.
LLM models and prompt-based inputs, right? So there is this application which does this magic. So data manipulation and parameter manipulation and the defense that you build around it and the data validation is going to take a completely new paradigm in terms of you probably need an LLM model defense in terms of prompt validation. What are good prompts? What are bad prompts? And even there, a smart attacker can bypass it. By like classic example recently was a malware. If you tell ChatGPT to write a malware, it won't. But you ask it to write a test case for doing a pen testing, it would.
It will.
Which can act like a malware.
Correct. Yeah. So I think the key here, I think you've touched on it now. The key here there is to make sure that two models are not the same. The two models, that the one that generates it and the one that validates it, are not the same, and they come from two completely different knowledge bases. So for instance, if you cloned me and asked me to ask one version of me to write a certain piece of code and ask the other version of me how it is going to break, the second person, the second clone is not going to know that I made a mistake here. Why? Because it's a clone. The key here is your model that validates what another model generates cannot be a clone. So you can't clone it. You'll have to rebuild from completely different knowledge. So that way, the knowledge that is being used to apply there is diverse and not a clone of an existing model. So obviously, there's then scope for multiple different models to live in this world. Just don't ask the same guy. That's all. But again, when you're writing code, when you're deploying code, at this point, AI models have not started generating pre-built libraries. The good thing is the day they're going to give you a lib file or some kind of a pre-built binary for, hey, this is the code that I generated with the prompts that you have requested, go deploy this. That's going to be bad. But if it gives you source code, and if you're not going to tell anyone other than a programmer to use that code. So if they can read and understand the code, it's almost, I mean, then it becomes a useful tool.
Yeah. Fantastic. I'm going to go on a little bit of a tangent here. Some of the things I picked up consistently in all the things you mentioned. Whether intentionally or non-intentionally, you have created a framework for yourself on a set of rules and way of doing things that applies to you based on your preferences and you like, and you stick to it. And you stick to it consistently, and then you iterate and refine a little bit on that path.
Yeah.
Right. And so there is a set of process discipline you have created for yourself. Now, the tangent I'm going to go, because I saw a little bit of the process discipline in action, because as part of your epiphany movement, the first thing you probably did was buy a plane. I sat in the plane with you once in Seattle, and my flexing of the muscle or show off I did to the people was it was too much of a traffic jam to go to the Tulip Festival. So I went to call up my friend, and we saw it from the by taking a private plane ride. But coming to the point, what I saw was you're going through a drill when you took the plane out. You are doing the takeoff. You are talking to the air controller system on the ground. You are watching the sky. You're looking at other planes that can be above you, below you. There's a very regimented set of process, and I believe that process can be painful, but it simplifies life big time. So, is there any analogies that you can draw as uh, something that you can learn from in security as well, or software building, or some of the things you mentioned?
Yeah.
What are some of these processes that you put in place to make sure that it is secure or minimize the risk? Finally, it comes
Yeah.
down to that. So it can happen whether you're driving a plane or driving a car or
Driving a
whatever, right?
car.
But you're minimizing the risk
Yeah.
through a set of rules.
Aviation is very interesting in that sense. There are some analogies which you can draw between aviation and real life when it from a security perspective. But the thing to remember about all those things that happen from the moment we open the hangar door, get into the plane, to the moment we get back on the ground, park the plane, and actually push the plane into the hangar and close the door. The process starts from one end to the other. And most of the things that you saw that day, most of the things that we do on a daily basis, and we hope not to miss on any of them, are lessons that have been, those are lessons that have been written in blood by many people who have gone before us, who have faced the consequence of missing out a step or taking a misstep. And we always hope and pray that none of us who are flying today make any of those mistakes. And if they do make some of those mistakes, you can make some mistakes, which is fine. But the question is, how many of those mistakes does it take for it to become an event? Right. So I could forget to take a few of those steps that you saw there. I could forget to pre-flight the plane, make sure that it has got enough oil, it has got enough fuel, and fuel doesn't have water in it. Even if I miss a step, nothing bad might happen. Now, when you compound those steps into 4 or 5 missed steps, or 2 or 3 missed steps, it would so happen that suddenly you find yourself in a bind, right? And one of the analogies that I tend to draw from that certain type of discipline is how many layers of protection is there between you and a disaster, right? And it's not specific to aviation, that if you look up the Swiss cheese model, and this might be common in the security space as well, you're talking about a bunch of layers of Swiss cheese. Each of those layers cover a part of the whole rectangle, but there are holes in there, things that layer does not provide protection from. So you put another layer of Swiss cheese, another one. Each one of these things that we do from a safety perspective is stacked together. And the goal is to make sure that when you put them all together, no holes are showing. And when you have them all together and there is one hole that happens to be in every layer of layers of cheese, when there's that one open hole, that is your real vulnerability, right? You become vulnerable to anything that comes through that hole. Now, so the goal here is to stack them all together. So from a security perspective, it is very easy. I mean, it's very obvious what we are talking about here. We have security at every one of those layers, and what one layer does not catch, the other should catch, and so on and so forth. At the end of the day, if there's a hole, then it's again, then only prayer can save you from someone just shooting something through that hole. Hopefully that won't happen.
Yeah,
and that's
beautiful.
I'm
going to use an analogy big time, because the layered security concept, I talk about it, but the Swiss cheese example you gave is right. I mean, I go ahead and preach virtual patching to my customers, like the right place to fix it in your code.
Right.
But it takes time for you to understand it, fix it. But you have this layer of virtual patching, which might give you the time to fix quickly and prevent that layer to keep you safe, right? So beautiful analogy, which I'm going to shamelessly reuse in my marketing campaigns, Goutham.
No, and if there's a hole that is still showing through, then just hand them a Bible or a Gita or whatever and say, start praying.
Yeah, good. I think, and I think 1549, does it ring a bell?
1549.
United Airlines
Yeah,
1549.
right, yeah.
It's part of it's a legend right now. 2001 to, I mean, what, 10 years, 15 years back,
It's been a
long
while,
time back.
yeah.
It's been a while. And it landed on the Hudson Bay River
Sully,
from
yeah.
New York. All the 4 engines shut down because of a geese going through the engines. He had a few minutes to take, not even a few minutes, 1 to 2 minutes to take a call where to land, what was his descent rate, what is the safest place to hit the ground based on the thing, how much time will it take for the airport air traffic control to clear it off if he goes back to LaGuardia or if he goes to the nearest airport. All those things, and within 30 seconds to 1 minute, he took a decision and said that, oh, I see a river there, and looked at the risk consequences of all the things, and he said, okay, fine, shut it down, and then landed it on Hudson Bay. Became a hero, and then one of the statements he made was the real hero is the process book. I just followed the process of what has to happen.
Right.
Which ensures that even though all the holes that you talk, all the things that bad happened, but the flight was still gliding, and the final hole before it gets exploited, he saw a river there, a safe place to land, and did a perfect landing, and no injuries too as well. Everybody survived.
He's I think he's not giving himself enough credit. But at the end of the you can have as many processes as you want, but when it's time for someone to take a certain decision, evaluating all the options that you have and taking the right decision based on experience, that's when the experience and his own talents come into play. And that's what they say about pilots, right? Most of the time, we're just sitting around and pushing buttons and tweaking dials and watching the airplane do its thing. So it's hours and hours of boredom, followed by maybe a minute or a few seconds of pure terror. And that's what you have to overcome to do the thing. And at that time, checklists, and that's what we call it, most of it, the checklists are really what saves you. Because again, those checklists are written in blood.
Yeah. Fantastic. Final thought on two things. One is, I mean, we covered a little bit on this. Your views on trends for the future, especially, and your view on is it more doom or more doom and gloom, or there is a lot of there is a doom and gloom threat which is certainly happening. But your trends for the future around LLM and generative AI, what do you think are the biggest risks? And finally, also, what is your view on web application firewall as another gateway or Uber AI that you call it? To just final thoughts on that, and then
It's not all doom and gloom. It is so where you see doom and gloom, you can also see that there are silver linings. There are benefits. There are major benefits to what is coming down the line. Now, if you look at the internet and say in 2000 and say, oh my God, this is the end of the world because all our computers connected now, everything is going to hell and back. It might not all be doom and gloom, and it will probably be short term. That feeling of doom and gloom will be short term, but eventually people will figure out, water will find its level. Suddenly you're pouring water into a certain contour. It will find its level. When it finds its level, it will be because of you realize the restrictions, the limitations of what it can and cannot do. And right now it's still in flux. Everybody is trying everything with it. And some of them will be successful. Some of them will take off. Some of them people will just say meh and move on. But most importantly, when looking at it from a security point of view, it helps to have companies like yours actually be the forward thinkers of what can and cannot be, and what measures to take and try to foresee them and put them in place before they actually become threats. Right now, the threats might not be as pervasive because AI is not still as pervasive as something like WhatsApp. So the scams that might happen in AI will only touch people who might be on the forefront. Eventually, it'll touch the common person, and that's the reason why your research into how the world of AI and WAFs and the applications behind your WAFs, where those boundaries are. So keep pushing those boundaries. I'm pretty sure that there will be opportunities for you, but threats for us.
Fantastic. Ladies and gentlemen, that was Goutham sharing his experience as technologists and software engineers, as he calls themselves, and been through a very interesting journey in large corporates as well as startups, and of course, owning his own plane. Thanks a lot, Goutham, for your time.
Thank you very much, Venky. Nice to see you again. You take care.